Before we start today's episode, a bit of housekeeping for all those listeners out there. Whichever your podcast listening platform of choice, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, reviews can make a huge impact. Not only do we value your feedback, which can help us create better content, it will also help others discover the podcast. So spread the love and leave a review if you've got a minute. And with that, on with today's show. I'm the Reverend Dr. Jenny McKay, veterinarian and minister in secular employment, environmentalist, activist, and self-confessed cat junkie. But believe it or not, I have never drunk Guinness, strictly for medicinal purposes. Someone who has is my guest, Katie, aka the Reverend Diddy Tup. So, Katie, for those listeners out there who don't follow your wonderful Twitter account, can you tell me about your Guinness drinking?
I could blame it on my parents. I blame a lot of things on my parents because when I was little, apparently the way they pacify me when they went to the sailing club for socializing was my dad would dip his finger in the froth of his Guinness and feed it to me when I was a little baby. So I'm gonna say it all started there. But more recently, I do have a taste for the dark ales. I was advised my iron count was very low before having an operation, and the nurse said, "Do you like Guinness?" I said, "Well, as it happens, I do." She said, "Well, what I would suggest is, this is my personal opinion, not my professional advice, is that you think of things that you could eat and drink that are very high in iron. For example, Guinness and dark chocolate." I said, "I can do that." So I did. And presumably it worked because when I took my blood before the operation, they said my iron count was fine.
And did you have to continue with this iron control after the operation?
Do you know, I didn't ask. So I just drank it on the off chance.
And you're doing okay after your operation now that you had earlier in the year?
Yeah, I had a full left hip replacement. So that was down to arthritis. I've actually got arthritis in both my hips. Lucky me. But the left one was more severe in terms of a surgical intervention. So they decided to do that one first. It's not my weight-bearing leg. My weight-bearing leg is my right leg, but they didn't deem that one sufficiently degenerative enough to warrant going in first.
Oh, so you might need to get the other one done at some point.
I will. I had a lovely chat with my consultant and said, "So medically, clinically, what do you think?" And he said, "Well, looking at your x-ray, it doesn't look too bad, but how does it feel?" And I said, "Well, looking at my x-ray, it looks a lot better on screen than it feels inside." So we're talking about maybe a few months' time, just so I can get properly over having the first one done, because it's a massive intervention in the human body, and just having an anesthetic anyway is quite a big thing. So,
Yes.
so the new hip feels great. My cerebral palsy, which is my underlying condition, doesn't like it very much. It doesn't like change. I think my cerebral palsy is probably a typical Anglican, sits at the back and mutters about change all the time. Doesn't like any of it, even when it's good. So, so it's been a bit of a journey on getting my neurological condition, my cerebral palsy, to understand and appreciate the joy of a new hip that doesn't hurt and doesn't grind anymore. So that's taken a little bit longer to get those two to work in tandem. So so I think probably in a few months' time, that's when we'll look at doing the other hip, and that will have its own complications in that this is the weight-bearing leg. So I can't just give it a day off and go, "I'll just use a crutch, it's fine." This is the one I rely on. So it'll be fun. Tune in next year for more details.
Yes, well, hopefully that all goes very well.
Thank you.
And you may have to take a bit more Guinness and dark chocolate before that one.
I can do that.
So I just wanted to ask you a bit about a live diversity webinar, which the Church of England hosted. That was last month, and it was the aim to discuss what it means to become a more diverse church, which of course is something the Church of England and all of us need to be thinking about. What did you think of the webinar, and how did it speak to your own experiences as a priest with cerebral palsy?
I thought it was ambitious to try and cover diversity in a 45-minute webinar. The speakers individually were very, very good people, particularly Reverend Rachel Mann, who is up in the north of England, talking particularly about gender and sexuality was her particular take on things. But applicable, I think, to people who are disabled as well. So what kind of church are we called to be? What kind of body of Christ are we to inhabit? If you're not normal, in quotes, then your identity is always under scrutiny and question. And I thought that was very pertinent, that disabled people are there to be looked at and assessed and prodded and poked, certainly by the medical fraternity. And I think we find that as well in church, that we're often being assessed for, are we useful enough? Are we capable enough? Are we competent enough? In some extreme cases, are we human enough to warrant belonging or even coming across the threshold, if we can even get in the front door? And for us, our bodies are an integral part of who we are, and our disabilities, our disabling conditions, and the way society treats us are a formative part of our identity. So trying to be more diverse as an institution is to bring in, to welcome in, to make space for people who are different from what has been the norm for so many years. And if you're a member of the normative group, being asked to move aside and make some room for these people who are not only not like you, but so unlike you, and so unlike you in a way that makes you afraid that you might become like them one day, then you're not going to want to give up your space. So I thought the Church of England wanting to do a diversity webinar was very ambitious. Trying to cover all of that in the time they had was possibly too ambitious. Some of the language used in the webinar was not terribly helpful. I did tweet about it at the time, so I won't go over it again. But just things around language use, profoundly disabled, wheelchair bound. I think they could have really done with some diversity training, the person hosting it, before actually hosting it. So it was, I think the intentions were very good. I think they tried to cover too much in one session. They could have easily done each bit in its own right, with some crossover conversation. And I think there could have been more conversation between those who were attending and those who are presenting. Always the danger of a webinar, not enough time to do what you want to do. So a good start, but not the whole story.
No. And really, you would have thought that they might have discussed some of this language and the way you approach these sorts of discussions beforehand.
You would think
would have thought so.
You would think so. And you asked about how the CFE is doing, not just in a webinar, but across the board. And I think it's a bit, I describe it as trying to melt a glacier with a matchstick. So I think the CFE, if you look back over the generations, the Church of England is doing better than it has. Is it going as well as it could have? Not really. But is it making some progress? It is. And there are good people on the ground doing really good things. And people like the Bishop of Bedford, Bishop Richard, who heads up various parts of disability within the Church of England, he's a really good thing too. And he's got working parties and different groups and individuals working towards different aspects of making disability not a fearful word and not a problem to be solved, but a rich diversity within the body of Christ to be recognised and upheld. So so people like that give me real hope that the CFE will continue to move forward, but just very, very slowly.
And you also work as well with Disability and Jesus, and that's an online community that you co-founded with the Reverend Bill Bravener. Can you tell me a little bit about that, Kate?
I can. So back in, I think it must be about 2014, but people will correct me. A bunch of us met in a pub in Harrogate because it was local to us all at that point. And pubs feature quite highly in a lot of my story. And and we all just sat together and said, why is there nothing of any good that is about theological stuff around disability written by disabled theologians? Why is it always about us and not with us in the middle of it? Why is there not a good amount of resources around training about disability awareness by disabled people, not just at them or talking about it? And what kind of came out of that conversation was the idea of a group called Disability and Jesus, a working title originally, but it kind of stuck because, well, it does what it says in the tin, really. And the three original co-founders were David Lucas, who is a blind activist who now runs the Ordinary Office account on Twitter, Bill Bravener, and me. And we were the main sort of movers and shakers in those early years. We've had a passing of the ways over the last few years. And so Bill and I have retained the Disability in Jesus name and continued with that. And David's continued with the Ordinary Office, both on Twitter. We're on Twitter because it's free so far. Who knows what direction it will go in next. And it's also a place where an awful lot of disabled people actually spend a lot of their time. It's where the activists spend their time trying to just make sure that disability is a visible thing, is talked about in the open market. It doesn't really get more of an open market than Twitter. So we're primarily there, but we're also on YouTube. We produce a recorded as live Sunday service every single Sunday. And then we try to do some of the feasts and the high days and holy days as well. And the New Year's Eve stuff, that kind of thing. Just to be online church, which is different from church online. So we're already online and we've said, how do we do church here? As opposed to being church and saying, how do we shift it online with a camera or live stream, which is a different thing again. And we're there to have conversations about disability, to talk about the relationship between church and faith and disability, to be disabled disciples in the public space, to engage with the disability activists who are outside the church and have no intention of being anywhere inside the church. And to say, yeah, actually, your critiques are completely right. We completely agree with you. What can we do together to bring social justice and faith and lived experience into a good space to make good things happen and to critique and be critical friend to the systems and the organizations?
That's brilliant. And I mean, social media, it opens up so many doors, doesn't it, to discussions with everybody.
Yeah, and you can get to everybody without having to get in a car and drive anywhere. Whereas when you do things on site, there's the global footprint to think about, the climate change and stuff, not having to spend money on diesel and what have you. So yeah, in social media, you do get some weird people on social media as well. You get some of the trolls, you get people who hide behind avatars and you wonder exactly who they are.
Who is that?
You say, if I met you in a cafe with a cup of tea, would you say that to my face? I don't think you would. So move on. But you do get the people who look and go, oh, you can be, for example, a priest in the Church of England and disabled. I didn't know you could do that. Yes, you can. Other leadership availabilities are also there. But it's not all about being ordained, but being a very visible ordained person and a visible disabled person on something like social media gives people the opportunity to go, oh, so someone like me is doing something like that. Maybe I could too.
It's fantastic. It really is, because as you say, it's not out there anywhere. When you're thinking about ordination training or whatever, it's very, very much geared up to the normal, if you like.
It is, and all of our systems, whether it's faith, belief, whether it's society, politics, economics, big business, small business, the normative is usually able-bodied, white, middle-class men who are quite well educated and are comfortably off with their finances, and that's always been the model. And anyone who comes into that from a different perspective will always struggle. Disabled people, I think, struggle more because I think people are afraid of becoming disabled because of the way that society talks about disabilities. So who wants to join that? Then you join us from accident or incident and you go, oh, this is great. You guys are all right, aren't you? You're not quite as scary as I thought you were. Although some people who join the disability community for a short time because they've had an accident or an incident and then get better, you can see the relief on their faces as they go, phew, I'm back to normal again. So I think disability is the scary one of the minorities because anyone could join our ranks at any point. I mean, no white person becomes black overnight. No straight person becomes gay overnight. But you could literally join the disability community overnight for accident or incident. And it's the one community that anyone could join. And is talked down so much who would want to. But then you do join us and you go, oh, you guys are okay. And being a visible person anywhere is it takes some guts. Living with a visible disability is a huge thing because people are attracted to that with stones and outrage and and in proper language and what have you.
And and the clerical colour as well, would you say? Yeah.
Yeah, if you get both,
Both.
people don't know what to
Both.
do with you. You're like, how can you be a priest and disabled? Watch me.
But you also have a tremendous role as a disability advisor for the Oxford Diocese. So can you tell me a little bit about what that role entails and how does your work help foster inclusivity and accessibility within the church?
In a nutshell, I think my role for Oxford Diocese as a disability advisor is probably on 3 levels. I'm a good Anglican, I like everything in threes. So here we go. It's Trinity. So there is what you might call the ground level, the grassroots, the where people are actually doing the stuff. And that is visiting church buildings after an email's come in saying, we've got a ramp. Will you have a look at our ramp, please? And I say, I can imagine what your ramp looks like. And I'm usually right. So we talk about ramps. What I actually do is I send them an audit, which is a narrative audit, which asks questions rather than being a tick box, and they feel bad about not ticking boxes. And then they send me that back with pictures and a little video sometimes. And I say, that's great. That gives me an idea. And I come and do a visit and we walk up the whole site. I use crutches to walk around site visits. I use my wheelchair at church house. It's easier. So we walk around the whole site from wherever I park my car all the way up to the altar and everything in between. And we talk about how we can make little changes to make small things better signage, different font, easier things to read in terms of notice sheet and service sheets, not storing communion wine in the disabled toilet, all those kind of things that seem obvious to you. Replacing the gravel with actual tarmac path because it's better. Little things like that. We talk about bigger things which are going to need Archdeacon to give permissions for things. We talk about the really big things which are going to need full-blown faculty, so planning permission from the Church of England to do those things. We talk about grants and how to raise money and where to go and apply for those kind of things. And we talk about all those things, and we touch on liturgy and language and prayer ministry and how it's done, and how they're raising up vocations of all kinds of people from within their church communities. So that's kind of the ground level. And I work alongside those churches to say, how can we get you a little bit further along, making not just welcome and accessibility, but full inclusion, and so that everybody belongs. The next level up, I suppose, is probably looking at the institutions within the diocese. So the vocations team, communications team, the area offices, all the people that kind of operate from church house and its equivalent, to say, are we modeling the things that I'm asking the churches to do? Are we doing it in our language, in the way we operate? Are we raising up vocations from different diverse communities as well? Are we watching our language on our emails and on our websites and the things we send out from church house? All that kind of thing. And then I suppose the third level is trying to connect with other dioceses as well, and looking at the national church. What are we doing as a national church? How are we connecting the disability advisors in each of the other dioceses? There are 42 dioceses. They don't all have a named person, and only 4 have a paid individual to do this work. The others are relying on volunteers in their spare time or their free time, or within the HR remit at church house, whatever. So 4 out of 42 dioceses pay someone to do this. And I'm the chair of the network, so I connect them and we resource each other, we talk to each other, meet on Zoom every month and how it's going. So there's that national picture as well of how we're doing nationally and who needs help and which dioceses have nobody at all. So I'm trying to do a little bit of that. And how we foster inclusivity.
Do you think that will change?
Go on.
Do you see the wheels of change? Getting more paid employment for these advisors?
It certainly gives me an oversight into how each diocese approaches disability and where it places it as a priority. And I know that everyone's skint, and no diocese have lots of money, apart from the big ones that have lots of historic money, which makes them paper rich, but not necessarily cash rich as well, which is tricky. So it gives me an oversight of how we're doing. And they give me hope as well. Those individual diocesan advisors who are not being paid for what they do, they give me real hope because they care and they really want to do this, and they get no remuneration at all. Some of them get hardly any support, but they really want to make a difference. So we are seeing inclusivity and accessibility. We're seeing people becoming more aware. I do training events for different dioceses as well as my own. With people who are trained to be readers or curates or incumbents, what have you. And you can see people going, oh, that hadn't occurred to me. Does that also mean this is problematic? Yes, it is. You're getting it. So fostering inclusivity and accessibility. I suppose we are, because we are the voice that says, have you considered, have a look
Yes.
at, what do you think about? We're not the audit police. We're not there to tell people
No.
off, but we are there to say, from lived experience, can I just share with you that this needs adjusting? This is problematic. That's a downright absolutely no. So I think slowly and quietly, we are making a difference, like, a grain of salt in a vat of cake mix.
Yes. Well, as you said, it's like many things in the CV. I don't want to come across that I'm criticizing the CE, but it is very, very slow. I think some people like me who were ministers in secular employment have faced similar misunderstandings. People, don't really get it what that ministry is about, and it's all about turning this big ship around, isn't it? Just moving forward with the age, really. What it says in the Bible is, that's another thing. People can sort of pick things out of the Bible, but if you look at it holistically, isn't that message? And as well, it's to love people, to include everybody, and how much better the world would be and the church would be if we all lived up to that.
Yeah, I mean, John 3:16 and 17 doesn't say God so loved most of the world that he sent his only son to pick his favourites, and the one who'd been to Oxbridge and went, well done, good and faithful servant, and looked at the rest and went, not so good. It said God so loved the world that he sent his only son, not to condemn, but to save. Yeah. So any church or individual that looks like it's condemning more than it's rescuing, I'm highly suspicious of.
Yeah. So your ordination journey, Katie, it's actually been 2 decades since you were ordained.
I know.
Can you tell me a little bit about that journey into priesthood? Was it something that was a big part of your childhood, or did it develop later in life?
My journey to dog collar was a bit bumpy. When I was 7, I was part of my church choir. We lived in Wales at this point, Welsh Wales. So if you're an English person and you can sing, then that's great. If you can't, then you need to learn Welsh quickly. Otherwise, you're in trouble. So I jest, but the Welsh people are very proud of their Welsh heritage. So it's a good thing to be an English person who can sing or speak Welsh. So I was in the church choir and very much part of church life in terms of the music, and enjoyed the Sunday school, which was great too. But at the age of 7, I kind of had this, what I now think was an existential crisis, which sounds very grown up for a 7-year-old, but that's how I would now recognize it, which was recognizing that disability and having cerebral palsy was actually a bad thing. And society did not like disabled children, and we were to be pitied, and we were the object of charity. So I got quite cross about this and said to my mum, am I disabled? Am I? And the word at the time, forgive me, was the word spastic, was used an awful lot. It's a very medicalized term, but it's also quite a harsh term that's used against people. And so she said, well, yes, we've never made any secret of that. And I'm like, yeah, but why me? And it was a very kind of a difficult time, I think, being 7 anyway. It's quite tricky. I was quite cross with God. And I can remember our vicar, Reverend Ian Davis, who I think is probably dead by now, but I suspect he's not as old as I thought he was. He's probably about my age. But he had a long chat with me. And I don't remember what was said because I was 7 and I'm 49, so time has passed. But I do remember coming out of that conversation being more content that God doesn't make mistakes, and that disability and disabling conditions are part of creation and somehow okay. And that was okay. And at that point, God said to me very clearly, you're going to be a vicar one day. And I laughed, and I'm like, I'm 7. This is ridiculous. And I'm a girl, but there aren't any girl vicars.
Oh, yeah. That's the other thing. Yeah.
So I'm a girl. I'm a 7-year-old girl, and I'm disabled. That just doesn't happen. So thanks for the idea, God, but I'm going to be a helicopter pilot, which I thought was quite reasonable, not really twigging about the whole medical thing. So I hit my teens, and that conversation in my head with God had never gone away, but it had just gone very quiet. Hit my teens, and that conversation came back. God sort of snuck up one day and went, do you remember when you were 7? Yeah. And I said, you're going to be a vicar? Yeah. Well, you still are. And we were in Church of England by this point. We've moved to,
Okay.
and I'm like, yeah, but can I just remind you, I may well be older now, but I'm still a girl. I'm still disabled. The Church of England doesn't do disabled girls. So good luck with that one. And God's like, don't worry, I'll sort it. What, for me? No, for everybody. Okay. So I put that back in my head. When I hit my late teens and did a year out with the George Muller Foundation in Bristol doing youth and children's work. And again, people saying to me, you're going to be someone who should be a vicar. And I'm like, and I wobbled because the Church of England in 1992 famously turned around and went, women can be priests. And one of my big bugbears was, there's no point in being ordained for me if I can't do communion. Communion was the real draw, the real pull. It's all the rest I can do, but I can't do communion. So if I can't do communion, what's the point in getting ordained? And that was my story. And then blow me, the Church of England turns around and says, yeah, you can. I'm like, darn it, I've got nothing left. And I went, however, we solved the woman thing, still disabled, and I don't see any disabled priests. And God went, don't worry about it. They're out there. You just can't see them. Well, that's not very helpful. So I went through a bit of a discernment thing with Bath and Wells Diocese where I was at the time. I was also getting married and graduating. So they kind of wisely, but annoyingly at the time, said, go away and get used to being married, which I thought was interesting from a female point of view. They didn't say to the men. But, that was the advice I was given. Go off, get married, get used to being that for a bit, and then come back. So I got married, living in Birmingham then. So I said to Bath and Wells, bye-bye. So I was in Birmingham for a bit, married and working as a youth and children's work across Birmingham.
Okay.
And started again with the Birmingham DDO team, the DOS and Director of Ordinations and Ordinance. So started in with them, and actually 9 months later, I was on my what was called BAP in those days.
Oh, yes.
It's gone through so many different names now. On the final residential, and the advice was, yes, we recommend it wholeheartedly for ordination training. And I went to the bishop and went, are you serious? I thought I did my darndest to not get through my residential. I kept giving them stupid flipping answers. He said, yeah, they saw through that. Okay. So, a year later, I went off to Theological College, Wycliffe in Oxford. And 2003, Derby Cathedral, there I was thinking,
there you were.
How did I get here? And God went, told you.
Yeah, that little voice was there.
He was right, which is really annoying. So
away.
So God won that one. And it's 20 years. I don't feel old enough to be ordained 20 years. I look in the mirror and go, oh, I've got grey hair. Clearly I am. But in my head, I'm still 16 or something like that. So I can't believe I'm an old enough person to be ordained 20 years, having already had a bit of a career before that.
Yeah.
And it's great. I mean, there's highs and there's lows. My curacy was brilliant. I loved being a curate, and my training incumbent was amazing. Robert Parsons, who is now somewhere in Shrewsbury, retired in that kind of area of the world. He was the best training incumbent in the whole world. There was no one like him, and I loved it. First incumbency in Hathersage, Bamford and Grindleford in the Hope Valley in North Derbyshire was a huge learning curve, massive learning curve. I had my son in the middle of that. So becoming a mother as well was a massive learning curve. A disabled mum priest. That was interesting. I formed a group on Facebook called Clergy Mummies just to try and go, how do you do this? And now 13 years later, it's got 1,200 members. And I'm like, how did that happen? But it's a really cracking community.
That is amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
And second incumbency over in Sheffield, in Dore and Totley, which again, massive learning curve there. Had 2 cracking curates who were absolutely brilliant. So I became a training incumbent. I'm like, how did I get old enough to become a training incumbent? Yeah. And God, God's always at the background of everything. God's always one step ahead of me. I look back and I can see what God's been up to. I look forward and go, I'd like a hint, please, but I don't get that. It's always the hindsight.
Yes.
And God speaks only when he really needs to, very clearly. So only 4 or 5 times in my life I've actually literally heard the voice of God go, it's a voice in the same room as you and there's no one there. Mostly it's just the divine nudge that just nudges in the right direction, and you get that kind of butterflies something that says, no, this is a God thing, this is definitely what God's after. So yeah, it's all worked so far.
That's amazing, isn't it? Yes. So it's just the path, isn't it? You come to these crossroads in your life, and what you say, a voice is there. And it perhaps is only with hindsight that you can understand all the things that went before that.
I can always look back and go, oh, now I see what was that. But what I quite like is to have the other direction, rather than looking in the rearview mirror and going, oh, now I see. To look forward to the windscreen and go, can I just get a glimpse of where I'm going next? Yes. That's not how it has worked.
It would be nice, wouldn't it?
It would be great. It's like walking through a forest and standing by a tree and going, which way now? And it always works.
Hint, please.
It always works.
Now, Katie, you mentioned about being a helicopter pilot, but I think you also had ambitions to be an actor or to star in musicals.
Oh, I should be on the stage.
Oh,
there's only one problem with that is I can't remember the script. So, so I loved doing Amdram as a kid. I loved being part of sketches in church. I love being at the front, not till I'm looked at, so I can create an environment where people come in. Something different happens for a little bit. They laugh, they cry, they're taken outside of the ordinary of their lives, and at the end of it, they go away going, "That was great. That was really worth doing." And I was involved in various stuff. When I lived in Bristol, I got to go at the Redgrave Theatre and do a couple of performances, something called The Three Trees, which was a musical based on the original, I think it's Hungarian folk tale. I loved it. I was the chat show host in part 2, interviewing Don, who was the person who worked with the wood of the first half, which was The Three Trees and what happened to them. And I loved it. I was Cherry, the chat show host, who was very acerbic and very cynical, and gradually over the act becomes very drawn into the story of faith. And at the end of it, she's deeply moved, but can't admit that on camera. So she kind of dismisses the whole thing as a wonderful story and, how tragic and how touching and how wonderful. And she goes off stage looking very ponderous. And I absolutely love, you could tell 20 years later, I loved it so much. It was still with me. Yeah. And I did a lot of amateur dramatic stuff, and I was the vicar of Hathersage in the North, in North Derbyshire. So I knew I couldn't go on stage with a script because I was word perfect for scripts 2 weeks after the opening night, but not the opening night. So I was the worst actor in the world. I can act, I just can't remember my lines. But I love directing. I've written pantomimes alongside my husband for various Amdram things. And I love being the prompt for I was a prompt for a farce called Run for Your Wife by Ray Clooney, I think it was. And I was the prompt for that, my real baptism of fire with the Amdram group, and I loved it. And I love there's something beautiful about creating that space where people can come and just laugh and cry and enjoy themselves and think of a story and be challenged a little bit. Being part of a team. But I also I was part of the New Wine Network for a little while. And worked behind the scenes at Newark and then at Thirsk when they went up north, working for the control team and as chief steward for 1 year in Thirsk. And it's creating that space, that environment, that place, that safety where stories can be told, faith can be explored, life can be questioned. And I just love anything like that, which I guess is quite like being a priest, really.
That's
in so many ways.
Yeah, I was going to say that is another skill and talent that you can bring into your everyday ministry, isn't it?
Absolutely. And dream role in a musical. I think I'm a musicals kind of girl. Or pantomime. It's the purest form of theatre, pantomime. If you can't do it in pantomime, then don't try Shakespeare. That's where you really cut your teeth on learning stuff. But I know the story of P.T. Barnum is problematic, but I love The Greatest Showman. I love the music in it. I love the showmanship, the whole thing. So I think, and Barnum was the first stage show I ever saw when I was a kid. When I was 7 or 8, my mum and Auntie Brenda took me to go to the West End to go and watch a West End show, and it was Barnum. It was Michael Crawford playing P.T. Barnum. And I was enraptured by the whole thing. So it would definitely be musical rather than film. It would be stage rather than camera. As I like the thrill of live stuff. And I think it would be feel good factor rather than Phantom of the Opera.
Okay, it may happen. It may happen,
which I also love because I've also seen Michael Crawford in that as well, and he was just stunning. No one else compares to him, but then that's because I saw him first. So, but I think I would prefer to be on stage in pantomime or in a fun musical rather than something serious.
Yeah, watch this space, I think. Now, I'm sure you get asked this question a lot But for those listeners who don't know, where did the name Diddy Tup come from?
This is the shortest answer you're going to get because I do wax lyrical a bit. So my husband is 6'4". I am 5'4", so there's a huge height difference between the two of us. And I used to call him Tall Tup because he's very tall. So he then called me Diddy Tup, as in small Diddy. If you remember Ken Dodd and the Diddy Men were little characters.
Yes.
So my husband used to call me Diddy Tup. When we got married, he did. Not before, that would be weird. So our surname is Tupling. So I married the surname Tupling. So he was Tall Tup and I was Diddy Tup. And now our son on social media is Wee Tup. So I refer to him as Wee Tup rather than by his name. So I've got a bit of a safeguarding twitch about children and social media and how much we expose our kids without their consent, actually, on social media. So I always refer to him as Wee Tup because he was littler than me. He's now 13 very soon, and he's my height, which is really annoying.
He's 5'4".
Yeah, he's 5'3", 5'4", which is kind of irritating.
He's going to be very tall,
He's going to be very tall. He looks me literally in the eye. So he's not quite wee anymore, but wee as in younger. So Tall Tup, Diddy Tup, and Wee Tup.
Yeah, and Wee Tup is going to become Giant Tup, I think, if he keeps on. Yes,
he really is. But he's
on this trajectory.
Love him to bits.
Oh, and I also know that you are a bit of a Doctor Who fan as well.
Oh, yeah.
How far are you in the Doctor Who marathon?
We're just coming to the end of Colin Baker's time. So we introduced Wee Tup to Doctor Who. We started watching the stuff from Christopher Eccleston. So that's Doctor 9. And watch Eccleston and then David Tennant, then Matt Baker, then Peter Capaldi, and then Jodie Whittaker. And then we said to him, "This is a revelation, son. There's a whole load more before Christopher Eccleston." Like, why are they called 10, 11, and 12? There's only... They're like, there's a whole load more. So we went on BritBox. Other things are available, and discovered they were showing them all from the very, very beginning, from William Hartnell all the way through. And we're like, right, let's go back and watch them all from the beginning. So we did. William Hartnell was great, grumpy old grandpa kind of thing, and Wee Tup was saying things like, well, why does he just abandon people, and why does he leave them, and big questions about companionship and love and loss, and how he deals with that. And then Patrick Troughton was next, the sort of the Charlie Chaplin type character. A lot of those were lost, so the BBC have lost a lot of the tape, but they found a lot of the audio. Of course, they were recorded separately in those days. So a lot of them is animation or some of the stills from some of the shots they were doing, as well as some of the actual shows. So that was great to see the sort of how progression has been made in terms of filmography. And then I love Patrick Troughton. He was always a favourite character, but seeing him was absolutely brilliant for me. I loved him. And then John Pertwee, who's very flamboyant.
I loved him.
He would take you out for dinner. Find someone who looks at his companion Joe like the third Doctor looks at Joe. Absolute adoration, but nothing ever in it. Take you out for dinner.
And there was a lovely assistant. Yeah. I always remember there was an assistant called Sarah.
Yep. So Sarah Jane. Sarah Jane Smith, who went on to be.
It was John Pertwee.
With John Pertwee and the car Bessie that he used to drive, and just absolutely love John Pertwee. What I like is there's a slightly sort of queer take on this as well, which is that the Doctor adores his companions, but nothing ever happens. And you kind of go, that's interesting. Yeah. What if he was asexual? But that's just a slight side thing. So, but the ace community look at Doctor Who and go, he's definitely ace, absolutely. So,
he's brilliant.
An interesting take on that. And then, of course, my doctor, Tom Baker, when he turned up, I'm like, yay, doctor, my doctor. There he is.
The big scarf.
Oh, the big scarf, the floppy hat, the massive smile. Absolutely loved him. And because we're watching them kind of back to back, it was so short. We'd done all four of his, all his 4 years, whatever it was. We'd done it in like a month. I'm like, my doctor is gone.
I guess the episodes were probably, they were probably quite short.
They were quite short, and we're watching 2 or 3 a night. That's what we're doing. We're literally binge watching. Whoa. So we got through all those, and then when he regenerated into Peter Davison, I said to my son, I said, I can't. I need a couple of nights off. I need to grieve Tom Baker. He's like, Mum, seriously, this was years ago. I know, but I'm reliving it all. So then we watched Peter Davison, who actually, from memory, I thought was terrible. But actually watching him now, I'm like, he's really good, actually. Why did I dismiss
I
things
know.
I just
I always
mourned?
think all creatures, great and
Oh, he was
small.
great, wasn't he, in
I
that?
always think of him as the young
Loved
vet.
it.
I could
Yeah.
never think of him as the as Doctor
No,
Who.
doesn't quite. But it works now with that distance. Now we're on to Colin Baker, who at the time I thought was a buffoon. And now I look and I just think I'm just quite cross with him because he's quite rude to his assistants all the time, and he's quite puffed up, which I guess was the point. That's how it's written. So we're doing him. I can't remember who's next. Sylvester McCoy might be next. I can't remember. And then it kind of all goes off into sort of sidesteps and then the war doctrine, all that business. So we're nearly
And of
there.
course, we had a lady doctor.
Yeah, Jodie
Which was
Whittaker.
good to see.
She was
good.
great, and I think she was good. I think the writing let her down. If I'm going to be a proper little Whovian here, just for a moment, I think the people who did her writing for her did her a disservice. They could have given her better scripts. They could have given her better scenarios. They could have handled some of the story arcs much better. She did a crackingly good job with what was a poor do offered to her. And if you're the first woman in any role that's ever been done by a man, the first woman priest, for example, you're always going to be compared unfavorably rather than just going, let's see how it goes. So I think Jodie did a really good job, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to the 3 specials coming up with David Tennant back. It's like, what's he doing back as Doctor?
That's odd.
Great, I'm loving it. And then Ncuti Gatwa taking up the reins as the actual official Doctor after that. So it's going to be brilliant.
It's going to be good. Going to be good. Oh, I'm glad you went all the way through it. I know I've been through all the Star Trek, and it is funny when you go back to the very beginning, isn't it? I mean, it just looks so ancient, really,
Clunky.
And
the
science fiction and the cardboard robots.
But interesting enough, all the things that they were coming up with and the sci-fi ideas and the concepts and the visions, you look at now and go, that's not so daft, traveling at light speed and finding other countries, finding other planets and going beyond our own solar system. They were ahead of their time and warp speed and all that business. You go looking now as scientists and go, they were imagining this, and now we're actually finding it coming into fruition. So, but we can forgive them the wobbly sets for having the imagination to come up with all that kind of sci-fi stuff. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you say, the limitations in those days, it was tremendous.
Yeah.
So, Katie, if I can just transport you back in the TARDIS to your younger self, what single piece of advice would you give yourself?
That's tricky. I would go back to my 7-year-old self and say, your concepts are too small. Think big. Think the impossible, because it will happen. You've limited yourself and you've limited God, which people do. Don't limit yourself. The impossible is eminently possible. Just dream bigger. I go back to my teenage self and say, don't panic. Teenage years were tricky, family breakdown and what have you, and still hasn't resolved itself, 30 years later. Still got ripples from that. So I think I would say to my teenage self, don't panic. It will come good. It looks a mess now. It is a mess now, to be fair. Good things will come, and you will look back and you will appreciate some of the mess that you're living through at the moment. And I go back to my very first ordained self and say, remember this moment when you got ordained in Derby Cathedral. You knelt down watching the bishop come round each person in turn and lay hands on heads, and remember how that felt, that joy, that surprise, that joy. Hang on to that, because that's what's going to sustain you when ministry is a mess, when the system is failing, when the structures are appalling, when safeguarding is making the headlines and you really wish it wasn't. Hang on to that joy of knowing that God tapped you on the shoulder and didn't say come out of line. It was, you're meant to be here.
Yeah. And help to push some of these things forward.
Yeah.
So you have an extremely busy life, Katie. What is next for you on the horizon?
That's tricky. That's the question I'm asking myself. And I've got a feeling God's going to
Okay.
go, in hindsight, you're going to see it quite clearly. And I'd be like, no, I would like foresight. So at the moment, I've got my part-time job as disability advisor for Oxford Diocese. That's paid. I'm also an
Mhm.
interim chaplain at an Oxford college. So St. Hugh's, I'm interim chaplain there for the next year, academic year, having done 1 year already. And a lot of people are saying, oh, you could be a chaplain next. You can move into that. I'm like, yeah, I could. I really like being a chaplain. And I really like being a disability advocate, but I've got a
Mhm.
feeling they're not the next thing, but I don't know
Mhm.
what is. There's kind of a godly nudge going, there's something coming next. And I'm like, that's great. What's that going to be? I'll let you know. No, don't say that because that
Ah.
doesn't mean anything imminent. God tells me with like 1 week's notice, and he goes, "Oh, here's a thing you should apply for that." And I go, "Okay," so I apply for it and I get it. So what's next is I really don't know. It's not what
Mhm.
I'm currently doing, I don't think, but what it looks like,
Mhm.
I've literally no idea. So if anyone out there can help me discern what the heck comes next, I'd be very grateful. Yeah, what next? Who knows? But God's definitely got an eye on what's coming up and will fill me in at the appointed time.
Yes, I'm sure he will. And we just have to have patience about these
Haha,
things.
patience, yes.
Patience.
It's a virtue, apparently. Well, yes. Many other things are too. So yeah,
Mm.
no, knowing God's got this is fine. I just wish that I was co-pilot with a map rather than in the back being sedated, saying, "Don't get car sick, you'll be fine."
It will. It will happen. But Katie, it's been really, really lovely talking to you. You're an inspiration, and keep on going with what you're doing because you're having a huge impact on the people you work with and the communities that you reach out to.
Thank you.
I've got to say, I am from Ireland, and I have actually never drunk Guinness. So it looks very dark and very heavy, but I think I may try that. So you have inspired me to try one of the tipples that you had.
Give it a go. You never know. You might like it.
So all the very best, and take care.
Thank you.